Hi, I'm Harvey Hubbell, and you're tuned in to Harvey Hubbell's Show and Tell. And I am with, you know what, Emily, I really think you're like a national treasure. I do believe that. You are like, I think you're the Walter Cronkite of educational reporters. And you're my friend. I know you. So
Thank you. That's quite a thing to say.
you can't talk about the science of reading without your name coming up right now. So that's kind of important.
I'll say this. I think it's true. I mean, I know this work is getting a lot of attention, but it's getting a lot of attention because of the like years and years and years of work by other people, in particular, parent advocates and all the research scientists who've been doggedly doing this work for a long time. So I came along and pointed out, hey, y'all, there's a lot of stuff that more people need to know about. And I think that's the power of journalism. Journalism can shine a spotlight on things that people need to better understand and need to know. So I think that's one of the things that's been happening. But I just want to acknowledge all the time the number of people who've been on the ground doing this work for years and years and years, long before I came along.
But you're the perfect storm. You're the person that came into the room with the flashlight, so everybody, a flashlight and a megaphone and maybe a pencil and a notebook, but and a lot of your hard work and research. So we always do a hero's journey on this, and I wanna hear your hero's journey. So it's the first time I ever heard about you. I was at the 4-H fair, and the coding dyslexia mom came up to me in the livestock barn and said, she's coming to Hartford. You have to see this person. You have to meet Emily Hanford. And the interesting thing is, you're not a mom of a struggling reader. You're just a guy doing your job, and you started going into the whole reading wars. You started researching it. You're an education reporter. How and why did you become an education reporter? How did you become Emily Hanford?
I think that when I started reporting on this years ago, I had no idea that I'd still be doing it 6 years later at this point. The first reporting I did on this topic was back in like 2016, 2017. And I was used to being a reporter that was making like 2 or 3 documentary sort of style projects a year about education, mostly at the secondary and post-secondary level. So the idea that I'd be doing the same topic 6 years later and that I'd be focusing so much on early instruction is really a surprise. And I think in hindsight, I think a benefit is that I didn't know very much about this. I should have known more. I had been an education journalist for a long time. I should have known this. The fact that I didn't, and that I didn't have a history with the reading wars, and I didn't cover the reading wars of the 90s and 2000s, or the National Reading Panel report, or Reading First and Reading First falling apart. The fact that I actually started reporting in education right about the time that all of that stuff was kind of coming to an end. It was 2008. And we were, for better or worse, I think, sort of moving on to other things in education reporting and in education policy, like teacher evaluation, Common Core, post-secondary access and persistence. I was really focusing a lot on that. So the fact that I kind of didn't know what I was getting into. And I think that was a benefit because I do actually think that there are veteran reporters who kind of were scarred by the reading wars, like a lot of other people have been, advocates and researchers too, who this topic is actually so hard and can get so controversial and frankly kind of nasty that there actually are people who are sort of veterans of these wars who kind of decided to retire from them. So I got into it kind of blissfully naive, I suppose. And I don't know how far back you want me to go. I have been an education reporter since 2008. I have been a reporter since the early 90s. I was an English major in college and wasn't prepared really to do anything right away, but realized now that I was prepared very well for life in the long term, but had no idea what I was going to do for a living and started being a reporter at a public radio station, and I never left.
Well, I love this because what we're doing is we're taking the timeline elevator backwards. So, a lot of the people that you run into, there's all kinds of heroes in the reading wars, and for me, my journey started. I've been involved in education since 1964. So, right? I mean, I walk into kindergarten, wow, pow, pow. It's crazy, right? So that's, I think, one of the powerful things about you. You didn't come in with an axe to grind. Reading came early, easy for you. So
Yeah,
talk to me about your reading. Talk to me about your family for a minute,
sure.
because you're a mom, you're a reader,
Yeah.
you're a lot of things. Let's talk about where it began.
Yeah, I didn't think much about how people learn to read or what they need to learn, what they need to be taught, precisely because I think I learned to read pretty easily. I think I actually come from a long line of people who learn to read relatively easily. And we do know that this sort of ability to acquire written language kind of easily is something that can kind of run in family lines. And in particular, difficulty with learning to read definitely has a strong genetic component. So I think I happen to be sort of lucky to be among those who this wasn't that hard for. I have two boys. They're 23 and 20 now. So it was a long time ago that they were in school, and they learned to read pretty easily too. I actually did have some questions about my older child. I do remember having a few like, what's going on here? And like he didn't seem to sort of like reading right away, but he is really the perfect example of a kid for whom it all did come together in time. And this is one of those things that schools will say to parents who have kids who are struggling. They know something is wrong, and the school will say, inevitably, read to him more. We got to find him in the right book. It's all going to be fine. And it is all fine for some kids. And my kid was one of those kids. And then I had a second kid, and he was one of those, who knows? Like he was like reading when he was 4. And I have no idea how he learned to do that. So I just didn't think about it. I think if I look back now, I probably believed that people learn to read by reading, and that it's one of those things that if kids are exposed to enough books and if they want to read, they'll learn how to do it. I think I probably thought it was a little bit like learning to talk. It just kind of happens. So that was sort of my bias going in, I suppose. And then it was first meeting college students in Connecticut who were telling me that they really had never learned how to read, and that they had essentially memorized all the words that they needed. And they were sort of guessing at and doing the best with the rest of the words, which were little mysteries to them. They didn't like to read. They didn't read very much. So they weren't getting better at it because they were barely ever doing it. They tell me the horrible stories that of basically avoiding reading and getting through school without really cracking very many books at all. And I was just like so amazed by that, maybe partly because reading came easily to me. So I started getting curious, like, how do people learn to read? What is dyslexia? I didn't know anything about it. So I went down the rabbit hole of learning about learning disabilities, dyslexia in particular, and special education law, and all of the really difficult times that so many parents have had sort of encountering a kid with a learning problem and trying to get access to the kind of instruction that they are required to get by federal law. But it was through that search, it was through learning about learning disabilities, it was through talking to a lot of parents and their children, that I started to realize there was so much research on reading and how it works. And one of the many reasons why special ed becomes such a battle in schools is because many people in schools, not all, but in many schools, in many instances, there are just a number of people who are in charge of the instruction who don't know as much as they need to know or they should know about reading and how it works. So when a kid comes along and is really struggling, they really don't know what to do. But I started to make the connections with the help of many others to core instruction, to recognizing that there are lots of kids who are struggling, who aren't getting the help they need because schools don't know what they need to know about reading and how it works and how to help a kid. And that many kids' struggles with reading are made worse by the fact that they're not getting good core instruction. So dyslexia is real. Don't let anyone tell you that there's no such thing as dyslexia. But there are kids who are being diagnosed with dyslexia. And one big part of their problem is they were never taught how to read. And there was a way that we could have prevented that problem, or prevented that problem from getting to as severe as it has gotten in many cases, if the kids were really taught well when they were in kindergarten, first and second grade. So we have a core instruction problem. And the way that I see it now, it's sort of flipped. Like the way that I understand it now is there is a relatively small number of us who learn to read really easily and don't need much instruction. There is a much larger percentage of us who really need good instruction. And then there's another small but not insignificant portion who need a lot of good instruction, right? So it's this whole continuum, and it doesn't have to do with intelligence, right? Lots of really smart people struggle to learn how to read and struggle with reading their entire lives. And so I think once I realized that this isn't about intelligence, it's actually a really big problem. Lots of kids have a hard time learning to read. It gets made worse if they don't get a good instruction. And they're not getting good instruction in a lot of schools because there actually is sort of a prevailing assumption that kids will just learn how to read with a little bit of instruction and a lot of exposure to books. And that just isn't working for a lot of kids.
You said it all. You just summed it up. And so all of us parents, and by the way, you came from a reading family. And then you married a husband who came from a reading family, but sure. you could have married a dyslexic, and they could have ruined that whole entire reading line of your family. Then this one can read, this one can't read, and just so
true.
So, but nobody. We just thought, the average parent, you wake up, you get the kid out the door, you put him on a yellow school bus. He's out of here. She's out of here. They're going to learn how to read, and nobody has these conversations. Now, everybody's having this conversation. I mean, I believe it's the perfect storm now with the science of reading. And there's so much going on. So you went down this rabbit hole, and you have a great body of work that you've put together on these documentaries, these radio documentaries that you put together. So when did it... Now, we have this turning point. When did it really start turning, and when couldn't you quit? When could you not get off this?
Good question.
Yeah.
Good question. It's interesting. I think back on that a lot. What's really these things kind of happen, and then you look back and you realize that there were moments along the way. I remember this moment really early on. It was like November or December of 2016. So it was almost a year before the first documentary I made about dyslexia came out. And I was actually at a school in Baltimore County, a private school, specialized private school for kids with language-based learning disabilities. And I was sitting in a meeting with a whole bunch of moms, and they were members of Decoding Dyslexia and other groups that were really advocating for changes in policy in Maryland. And I was just listening to them, and I was recording the meeting, and I just had this I just had this feeling like, oh, this is the tip of a very big iceberg. I just remember thinking, like, this is big. There's a lot I don't know about this, but I think this is really big. So that was like at the very beginning. Like that was probably like the second reporting experience, second time I turned on my tape recorder related to this topic. So I look back now and realize that I had that kind of flash of a moment. And then I think it was when I made that sort of connection between dyslexia and this larger body of research on reading. And I read Mark Seidenberg's book, Language at the Speed of Sight, which I'm pretty sure came out in 2017. So I think it literally came out like a couple of months after that moment at this private school that I was talking about. And I read that book pretty soon after it came out. I still have my hardcover copy full of all kinds of underlines and all kinds of different colors of highlighter and all kinds of sticky notes, because I've read and reread and gone back to sections of it so many times. And that was just so eye-opening to me. And then I remember talking to Mark and meeting Mark and being on a reporting trip with Mark, and then following the footnotes in Mark's book. And here I am, a good reader, which is something that I have taken for granted for a lot of my life, but I read pretty quickly. I read pretty fast. So I just started reading like crazy. And the great thing about being a journalist is that you have this excuse to just call people up. you read someone's article, you read someone's book, and you call them up and think, can I talk to you? Can I do an interview with you? I think that's what's kept me as a journalist all these years. Probably you too. It just gives you this excuse to put a microphone in someone's face and get them to start telling their story and tell you what they've learned. So somewhere along the way, I was hooked at an intellectual level. Like I just started to realize this is fascinating. Wait, how do we learn to read? What is up with this? So it was this combination of like intellectual fascination, recognizing how big it is, and then just feeling the stakes, like recognizing that there are a lot of kids and families who have been and are being harmed by the fact that schools and teachers don't know as much as they should. And then I think the final layer in it all, and probably one of the layers that keeps me going most of all now, is the teachers. So I just talked to so many teachers who didn't know this, had a gut level feeling that something was wrong. And they're just encountering a lot of the research for the first time that I was encountering over the past few years. And it's life-changing. It's really rocking their worlds. And this stuff is hard, and education change is hard, and teachers are under a lot of pressure, and there are a lot of demands on teachers. But I've just met so many teachers who are like, I got to do this. I want to do this. I'm going to figure this out. This matters. And I think just so many people understand when they start to get into this, the stakes. And when you really have an appreciation for the stakes, you kind of can't quit.
Well, I'm in total agreement with you that in our society, the educators are any nation's greatest resource is their youth. And back in the days of Little House on the Prairie, man, the teacher moves into town. We give them apples, we give them food, we're giving them subsistence. I mean, I think anybody who wants to educate our kids and those first grade teachers. I mean, in our film, we spend a year in the classroom with first grade teachers, and you're watching how hard it is. I mean, I agree with you that in our society, these are some of the most important people, those professionals, and they were sold a story. They were sold a bad bag of goods. So now you're committed, they're committed, and wait a minute, I just want to just clarify something. When you got involved, you were watching these dyslexic families, and these dyslexic families are committed, and these like shock troops that are real change agents. But here we are in the reading wars, in the science of reading, and second language learners, people who in Waterbury, Connecticut, where we did the film Hopeville, they speak 60 different languages. And so, it's like, okay, I'm going to get some people who can speak Spanish. I'm going to have them in the classrooms. Yeah, okay, that might help out. Nobody saw it. There's going to be a whole bunch of Ukrainians showing up one day.
Yeah, right.
So how many people have struggles reading? And you got to get that foundation early on. We follow a shy kid, because I just love having a camera crew follow a shy kid around for a year. So, but there's a lot of reasons that people struggle. And dyslexia,
it's true.
It's
one of them.
Those moms always said, if you teach the whole classroom, the other parents would say, hey, we don't need to do this. We don't need to teach our kids, or the Board of Education, or a school superintendent, or somebody else. We don't need to get involved in that just because of the small minority of kids. Now we're realizing, wait a minute, and this is what the moms said before, and they got it from the researchers, is that this helps out everybody. And now we're proving that. So let's talk about how the sea change is happening now, and why is it good for everybody? Why should I eat my vegetables?
Well, I think you've identified the fact that there are a number of reasons why kids may struggle with reading. And I think for too long, it was easy to say, well, some kids need more instruction, need intervention, but most kids are going to be fine with the way we're teaching it now. And so, and I think the research really shows that isn't the case. And I think, I don't know, I think we're looking at ourselves in the mirror. Like, I think it was possible for some people to dismiss this as a problem of poverty, right? And I'm not saying that poverty has nothing to do with it. That is one of the things that can make learning to read a challenge, because we know, especially read Mark Seidenberg's book, our sort of language comprehension abilities really do form the sort of base of our kind of growth and ultimate sort of top of our reading ability, right? It is based on our oral language comprehension and abilities, but learning to read is not like learning to talk. And so there's more involved in really learning how the written language works. So I think it was possible for a long time for people to say this is a problem of poverty. But all you have to do is look at the numbers and realize there are actually more kids struggling with reading than are struggling with poverty. By some estimates, a third of struggling readers in this country are from college educated families, right? So it's not okay to say, to sort of say we have to fix poverty first. When I look at the test scores now, I try to tell people, rather than looking at them and saying, this is poverty, why don't we look at them and ask, what if this has to do with wealth? So one of the things that's happening out there is that there are a lot of kids who aren't getting the instruction they need in school. And some kids are lucky enough to have parents with bank accounts that are big enough to hire the tutors and get them the instruction they need. So one of the things that one of the moms at that meeting said to me in Maryland those many years ago said to me in a later interview is getting help for a struggling reader is a rich man's game in America. And that really stuck with me. Whoa, what? And what she meant by that is if you've got a struggling reader, you can probably figure out a way for him or her to get the instruction they need because you can pay for it. But what about everybody else? So I think there's been sort of a recognition of how big this problem is. So I think that is motivating a lot of the action and activity here. It's clear from the research, and it's again, I think there are a lot of teachers who had a gut level feeling, and depending on where they were and in what classroom they were, there were always 2 or 3 kids who they knew they couldn't help. For some teachers, it was half the kids or 3/4 of the kids that they knew were really struggling with reading, and what they were doing, the instruction that they were providing was not enough for those kids. It wasn't the right instruction, and it wasn't the right amount of it at the right time.
Well, to your point, you don't have to be a social scientist to take a look at the reading scores in prison and how many people are illiterate in our prison system. And I say this all the time. What kind of job are these people going to get? So we have a crisis that we have a reading crisis in this nation that everybody is beginning to understand, and nobody was talking about it before. They didn't realize, well, how does it affect me? But it does affect it. It affects all of us. So I have a couple questions for you. What advice would you give a parent whose kid is struggling with reading? What do you tell them?
Well, the advice that I can provide is based on what I have heard from other parents as a reporter. I am not a professional who I'm not a researcher, not a reading teacher, I'm not a reading interventionist. What I know about what I am going to answer comes from what I've heard from so many parents. So I think number one is trust your gut. I think when you think that there's something wrong, there probably is. And I think it can be because it's very difficult sometimes to confront the school with this, and because there can be a lot of pushback from the school, I think a lot of parents talk themselves out of it. Oh, well, maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe they're right. Maybe this is going to be fine. And maybe it will. But if your gut is telling you something's wrong, there probably is something wrong. So keep pushing, keep pressing. This is your kid. And there's urgency here because time is a factor, right? Your kid is 5 now, and then she's going to be 6, and then she's going to be 7. And this stuff compounds, and this stuff gets more difficult, and it starts to get really entwined with social emotional issues for kids who really develop a lot of anxiety and behavior problems sometimes to avoid being the one called on to read, to try to not get people to focus on the fact that they're reading. It's sort of, as many people have said to me, it's sort of like, for some kids, it's like better to be the bad boy than the dumb boy. So trust your gut. And then the other thing is find the other parents who are in the same situation as you. Maybe it'll be hard to find who they are in your school. That would be ideal, to find who they are in your school, but find who they are in your school district, in your community, find them online, get advice from them, find out what they did. And I guess the third thing is because this is being talked about so much, there's more of an opportunity now, I think, than there even was a few years ago, um, for parents to say, look, um, here's some things you can read. This is being talked about in other places. Other schools have confronted this and are doing X, Y, or Z about it. So I think there's more of an opportunity now to be heard. I think parents for a long time had a hard time being heard by their schools. But I think that schools sort of have to hear it differently because there's this larger conversation going on. So use that. I mean, point to that. And there, one of the reasons I think that we are able to have this conversation about the so-called science of reading right now is because there have at this point been a lot of really good things like books by Mark Seidenberg and really accessible articles and podcasts like I've produced that really do explain this stuff in an accessible way. So point people to that. Ask the teachers, ask the people in the school to read and listen if they haven't already.
Perfect. Okay, so I know you're a reporter. You're not a researcher. You're not a an expert, as you say, but you know a lot of people. You talk to a lot of people. You take a lot of notes. So now I'm a decision maker. I'm in the board of education or a school superintendent. What advice does Emily have for them in this whole situation?
What I think that policymakers should do is talk to each other. Like we actually do at this point, I think, have some states that are trying to that are looking to each other. They're looking to places like Mississippi that's done some really effective things public policy wise. I think there are other states that are trying to follow some of that model, even learn from Mississippi. I think the people in Mississippi will tell you these are some things we wish we did differently, or these are some things that we're still looking at. So, as there are a number of organizations out there that I think are really looking at the policy side of this issue. Kimyana Burke, I think, is someone that you have talked to, and she worked in Mississippi, both at the State Department of Education, and she's worked in a school district, and she was a teacher, and now she is really looking at the question of what are some model state policies. So I think those are important things. I would just encourage lawmakers to look at those things. I think my most important message to lawmakers is passing a law can be hard, but it might be the easiest part of all of this. It's following the law. First of all, it's whether the law is any good, right? Like, many policies and laws have unintended consequences. So I want to say to lawmakers, once you've passed a law, it's very important to think about how it's being implemented, accountability about whether it's being followed, and doing the necessary follow up to say, are there fixes we need here? Are there things in this policy that are not as good as they could have been? Do we need to change the policy? Listen to the educators. I think right now we have a large number of educators who are starting to get this and really want to do the right thing. And I think it's really important for legislators to be listening to them and saying, hey, your law, your policy, your money is really helping us do X, but it's not helping us do Y. And so how can you help us do Y? Or you thought it was going to help us do X and Y, but it's actually doing this. Here's what you could do to actually help us. I hope that's the kind of stuff that happens in the years following.
Well, I think with I'm a big believer in the in the reading wars, in cooperation, not competition. And I always tell people, watch Kimona's film that she's in, Right to Read, all of your documentaries, and I think these are times to bring people together. Certainly in the case of a film where you sit down and like a film like Hopeville, or Right to Read, or any of the other films, people come together, policymakers, parents, decision makers, Board of Education, school superintendents are all in the same room. And then I love those. You're going to be on one of our panels up at the Reading League, and I'm looking forward to it. And it's going to be a bunch of educators, and it gives us all the time to kind of talk and refuel and get things going. One of the things that you always talk about is getting the research into practice. So you're talking about passing these laws, but now we also have to monitor and make sure that our educators are doing all of this stuff. So great, we should all pat ourselves on the back that we're coming up with we're reading white papers and peer reviewed papers, and then we even get a law passed, but we got to get it into each of the classrooms, right? So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, talk about the future.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to recognize that we can create a better path to the future by making sure we consider the past. So that's one of the things that I'd looked at and sold a story. There have been other times, and there was a big previous moment about 20 years ago when the federal government really took the lead on trying to get research into schools. Uh, Reading First is what it was called, and it was part of the No Child Left Behind Act. And for a variety of reasons, Reading First fell apart. I think a lot of it had to do with the politics of No Child Left Behind and some things about that bill. Again, unintended consequences. I think there were some good intentions of that law, but not everything about that law and how it was implemented worked. I think one of the things that I've learned from people who are involved in Reading First is, first of all, I've run into a number of teachers who really did learn about all of this research during Reading First, and it changed their lives. It opened their eyes, and it was huge. And they were never the same again. They really learned a lot about how to teach kids to read, and they tried to keep that going. And then I think the sort of forces of since of balanced literacy really made it difficult to kind of continue doing a lot of those things. And some of those teachers left and retired and or persisted as best they could. I've also talked to a number of teachers whose experience with Reading First was decidedly negative. They were told, this is now what you're going to do. They were handed a curriculum. They were told, do this. And they really didn't get a good understanding of the why and the how. And that's, I think, what we have to make sure teachers are getting now. Why? Why do I need to change? Why do I need to do it differently? And I believe that the why really comes from understanding, how do kids learn to read? When you understand that, you understand that many of the things you've been doing haven't been as good as they should. And there's a lot of things that you maybe should have been doing in your classroom that you weren't. And then it's really the how, how to do it. Like I know a lot of teachers who've read a lot. They read a book on the weekend, and then on Monday morning they have to go into a school and teach first graders how to read. That's hard. They need the how, they need the help, they need the coaching, they need good materials, but not just materials. I worry that too many schools are going to decide, well, let's get rid of that curriculum and those assessments, and let's buy some new curriculum and new assessments and tell the teachers they have to do that. And that's just not going to work very well. There's no perfect curriculum out there. This isn't about buying a new product. Teachers do need materials, and it helps them do their jobs. So I think it's important to look at the materials and what's in them. But it's not the answer. I think it's really about the ongoing support. It's really about teacher knowledge, coaching, good coaching, and ongoing support, and recognizing, my final point is recognizing that this is going to be hard and it's going to take years. And I think one of the things that happened in Reading First, it's very clear that there was a lot of progress being made in many schools, not all, but in many. And then it died. It before it really was able to have the impact that it could. And so we need to stick with this for a long time. Like, this isn't going to change in a year or two. It's not going to be time in 2025 to look back and be like, did the test scores go up? Because it's not enough time for schools to really make the changes that they need to make this work. So let's stick with it. We have a history in education and in policy in general of getting kind of focused on the shiny new thing and focusing on that and then moving on. And I encourage people to not move on from this one. I think it's too important. Let's stick with it.
Well, when you mean this one, I mean, because they talk about the education pendulum going this way and going that way, and the veterans say, "Oh, I've seen it before." But this is science. This is literally growing upon new information is coming out, and the tests are being peer reviewed, and you've said it. There's thousands of studies being done. So what we know now is even more than we knew when the Bush family wanted to, and they're big readers. There's also dyslexia in their family, which is an interesting, you look at a lot of these big families, and what their motivations are is education, and I wonder why. And you look at the Bushes, of what they really wanted to do at that time, and what came into it, politics. So can't we all just get along? Can't we put that stuff aside and can we think about our nation and think about our kids being somebody who we want informed, unless we don't want our kids informed, unless we don't want our
Yeah.
population informed, which is
Yeah. That the metaphor of the pendulum swing comes up a lot. And I want to, I sort of resist that metaphor because when people talk about, they're like, oh, well, we do this and then we go back and do this. And that frames this as a kind of like, usually ends up framing it as sort of a phonics or no phonics. And I'm seeing headlines just today, like back to phonics. And this isn't really back to phonics. Number one, it's not like there was a sort of great prior time when teaching reading was being done so well, and we need to get back to that. I can't find that time in history. I don't think there was that time. I think what's happened is over the past 50 years or so, we've accumulated a gigantic amount of research on this thing that was really a mystery for a long time. We just didn't know. And the pendulum went back and forth because no one really knew how kids learn to read and what they need to be taught. And now we know a lot more. And this should not be a pendulum. What's the right metaphor? I mean, the way that science works is you continually accumulate knowledge that's taking you in a certain direction, right? We're not going to have some profound finding that's going to be like, oh, all of that was wrong. Here's the answer over here. It's like scientists are continuing to learn really important things, particularly about learning disabilities and how they manifest and what kids really need to be taught. But this isn't going to sort of change on a dime. So it's not like we're going to like go back. It's like we're going to continually go forward. That pendulum is just going to keep moving forward. And that's how I think we need to see this one, recognizing that we're still, history marches on and we will hopefully continue to get better at this. But it's not like we're going to change our mind and then everyone's going to go back to something in the past. And this is about a whole lot more than phonics instruction. I have focused a lot on phonics instruction because I think the key thing is that teachers haven't understand why phonics skills matter and that good readers have good phonics skills and that is really the difficulty for a lot of people who have difficulty learning to read. It's really the relationship between the sounds and the letters and sort of the working memory and the speed it takes to make those connections and keep those connections in your brain in order to really map those words into your memory and hold them there so that you can read quickly and fluently. And that's what has been understood. And that's what I think teachers really need to understand. So there's been a resistance to phonics instruction because they didn't know why. So I wanted to help people understand the why, but it's so clear from all this research that if all you did is teach kids how to decode words, there'd be a lot left on the table. There's a lot more to being a good reader. And I think that the schools that are really engaging with us, all the scientific research are realizing that. Like, I still think in the journalism and sometimes in the public policy debate, we're having kind of a thin conversation about phonics. But I think in schools, that's not happening. I think a lot of people are getting it. This is not just about phonics for them. And I think that's really hopeful. I think the schools are really ahead of the policymakers on a lot of this stuff. And I think that's great.
Well, we are at a time where you've said it. We accumulated 50 years of science on top of this. We had all these stories and all these fables of how people, they get the reading nook and you give them a lot of books. And you told a great story, which we put in our film, about exposing kids to books and whether they can read or not. So let's talk about the Reading League. I'm going to see you in a couple of 20 some odd days. I'm going to see you there.
Yeah.
So you are on the road a lot. You're traveling around to a bunch of places. So tell me about what's happening with you at the Reading League. What's your talk?
Yeah, they invited me to be a keynote speaker. So I am writing a very kind of new talk, actually. I have sort of various versions of a talk I've given several times over the years. And I'm really putting some new thoughts down for the Reading League. So I'm going to introduce some new ideas, some things that I haven't presented before. And some of it's actually going to be some of the stuff we cut from Soul to Story. So as I know, as a filmmaker, you collect a lot more stuff than you ever can use. And some of that stuff you really wish you could use. We talk about having to drown our darlings in radio, like the things you get really attached to and think are really going to be great. And then for whatever reason, they just don't work. So I'm going to talk about some of that stuff, some of the stuff we cut, a little bit why we cut it, but why I still think it's important for people to think about it. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to kind of give a little bit of a behind the scenes peek at the making of Sold a Story and some of my thoughts about the impact that it's had, and some of my questions and concerns going forward, because I think the Reading League is an audience of a lot of educators who are really committed to this and are really at the edge of their seats trying to think about how to do this well, and are many of the people who are sort of the leaders within their school districts and across the nation on helping other people understand this. So I feel like this is sort of the cutting edge. So I'm going to introduce some new thoughts and see where it goes. And I'm really excited to be I'm going to be there for the whole time because I want to go to sessions and learn what other people are presenting. And it's a great group of people with a lot of important things to say.
Well, the Reading League is another example of your walking pendulum, your walking forward pendulum, the evolution of these educators now getting the science and putting it to practice right away. And you do get to see all of these great people that are going to be there. Kareem Weaver is going to be there. You're going to be there. Of course, Maria Murray we did a podcast with her last week, and
I saw it.
There's just a lot of great minds talking about the science of reading, which is great. So I'm
going to get to see your film, which I haven't seen.
You're going to see our film. So what happened is I talked to Maria and I talked to Alexia, and they're saying, well, we could put the film in. We didn't know when our film was going to be done, and it was like we had the chance to play it there, but everything got sold out already. So they said, well, we can put you in after the conference is over, after Emily Hanford's talk. And I was like, well, I want Emily Hanford on my panel, and I bet you she'll probably stick around a little bit just to spend another couple of hours, and she could watch the film then. And so let's talk about that. When I met you during the pandemic.
Yes, you did, and you also filmed me during the pandemic when I needed a haircut and a hair color. So for those of us just with the vanity thing, seeing myself in your film is going to startle me. But we met in my hometown during the pandemic. You came to visit me.
And our camera, I was in a separate room from you, actually. I was like way far away. But
I think one of the things that the pandemic did too is bring in a kind of wider swath of parents. So, there are a number of parents, and they tend to be the parents of the kids who really struggle, right? Because that becomes just glaringly obvious when your kid isn't learning to read and they're really struggling. And usually those kids have some sort of particular learning difficulty that just makes this learning to read thing difficult, really difficult. But I think what the pandemic did, because all of a sudden there were parents who were often sitting there getting a little glimpse, or maybe sitting there for the whole lesson, and they were seeing how kids were taught. And they were seeing that it didn't make sense to the parents, and they could see that it wasn't making total sense to some of their kids. And I think we just brought in sort of that larger spectrum. There's this spectrum of ability when it comes to learning how to read. So there's the kids who really struggle, and then there's this sort of middle group, and then there's this group of kids who it's really easy for. I think the pandemic just brought in more of the parents of that middle group, right? And they were just, it raised questions for them. And then many of them went to the internet, as we all do, and were trying to investigate what's going on. And then they came across the fact that there's all this stuff now out there about this, right? Because the science itself has matured, because people are communicating it. So they came across articles, they came across films, they came across podcasts, they came across books written by cognitive scientists, and some of them really dug in on this. So I think one of the things that has changed over the past few years is just a wider swath of people are looking at this and recognizing that there's something that needs to be fixed that's going to help a wider range of children, not just the kids who struggle the most. So I think and then I think the other obvious thing that the pandemic did is raise the alarm bells again, because we have seen a drop in reading scores. And so it has caused people to look and be like, what are we doing? What's going on? And whenever I look at those reading scores, I want to remind people they haven't been good for a long time. And it's true, we've seen a recent drop. And I think a lot of that was probably caused by COVID, but now we have even a bigger problem to solve.
So I just want to just think about this last part as we begin to wrap up. We kind of talked about where we're going, and we know it's not it's not an easy road that we're on. We know that everybody's talking about the science of reading, but I mean, this is, you said it before. We have to stay focused. We have to stay on it. How do people find information that they need? They're all coming at it from a different end. It's a madcap, crazy internet world. How do people find the information they're looking for? What do they do? Help me.
And discern good information from, what's the best information. Well, I will say that on the website that we've created for Sold a Story, you can get onto this other website, which is it contains all of the reporting that I've done with my colleague Christopher Peak over the last several years, and you can find several of the previous documentaries, and they have footnotes in them. So you can go down the rabbit hole of looking at those footnotes, and that will take people to various essays, books, original papers about all of this stuff. We also have a number of reading lists on the Sold a Story webpage. I just picked 10 of the things that have been most helpful to me in learning about all of this. And they're it's sort of a variety of things, some good overviews of what the scientific research is, some stuff about how people might be able to teach their own child at home, just a sort of more journalistic take on some of this stuff. So I think you have to find the sources that you trust, and that is about asking other people. That's about asking teachers and parents, where do they go for information? What are the things that they have read? I think that's how you do it. But it's always difficult. There's a lot of information out there, and this is overwhelming. There is a lot of information out there. That's one of the reasons I made the reading list and just decided to just choose 10 things that helped me, because you've got to start somewhere, and those are all good places to start. And then you can sort of choose your own adventure in terms of how you want to follow the footnotes and the endnotes and all of those various publications.
I think that's great advice. I mean, and again, you're a researcher, journalist who started going down these rabbit holes, but we're all on a different journey. And some of us are parents, some of us are educators, some of us are concerned citizens. So we all go down there. Okay, what's the most important stuff that we need to be thinking of right now? What haven't we talked about that you're thinking about, that you want, which you're not gonna? I don't want you to tell us your story of the reading league. I'm gonna sit there in the audience. I'm gonna listen to it unfold. But what else? What do we need to know?
What else? You've covered a lot of ground. I have a whole bunch of questions that I want to get answered, and I'm a reporter. So hopefully I'm going to go out and try to get some answers to these questions and then report on them. I have lots of questions about older struggling readers and how best to help them, how best to help adults, some of the mistakes that are made sometimes, and how people try to intervene and help older kids. A lot of questions about, I get a lot of questions about how can I help? What can I do? There's a lot of goodwill. There are a lot of people who are still busy working and want to volunteer some of their time to help support a kid who's struggling with reading. There are retired people who want to become tutors. I don't think we have enough entryways in for people to give 2 hours a week or half an hour a day or 10 hours a month to help with this. And I think a lot of people have had a lot of their goodwill time. They wanted to help kids to read, but they didn't get any good training. They weren't given good materials about how to teach kids. So that's something I would love to see get better, so that people who really want to do something about this have something that they can do. So yeah, I mean, we could probably talk forever. And I think another really important thing, a lot of laws are being passed. And so people have to do wherever you are in all of this. You're a parent, you're a teacher, you're a journalist, you're a filmmaker. I think it's on all of us to kind of, as I said before, like keep at it, but keep watch, make sure that there's a good ending here. I'm a journalist. I'm not an advocate. I'm an advocate for my work. I'm an advocate for this knowledge, but I'm also a citizen. I'm a mom. I hope to be a grandmother someday. Like, I want this story to end well. I want us as a nation to figure out how to do this better. And this is it's a big story and it's a big moment. And, I think everyone needs to do their part to figure out, what do I need to do to help this story end well?
Well, you're definitely doing it. As I said before, you're our nation's treasure. Uh,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all you've done in the
Great.
piece.
Congratulations on getting your film done. I
Thank,
know it's a big deal to
thank.
get something like this out the door.
Oh yeah. Well, I can't wait. I can't wait to show it to you and have a great time up there with everybody.
All right, great.
All right.
Bye.
Peace. Bye bye.
Thanks, everybody.
You all come back now. You hear?